Intro, October 1962. The world was going about its daily routine. Children went to school. People went to work. Life felt normal. But behind closed doors, global leaders were making decisions that could end civilization. The United States and the Soviet Union, two nuclear superpowers, stood on the edge of war. And for 13 terrifying days, the world came closer to nuclear destruction than ever before. This is the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cold War background. After World War II, the world split into two powerful blocs. On one side, the United States. On the other, the Soviet Union. Both had nuclear weapons. Both distrusted each other. Both feared surprise attacks. This era became known as the Cold War. It wasn't a direct war between the two powers, but a constant political, military, and ideological struggle. And Cuba would soon become the most dangerous flashpoint. Why Cuba mattered? In 1959, Fidel Castro took control of Cuba after a revolution. Cuba was just 90 miles from the coast of Florida. When Castro aligned with the Soviet Union, it alarmed the United States. In 1961, the US attempted to overthrow Castro through the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. After that failure, Cuba moved even closer to the Soviet Union for protection. For Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, placing missiles in Cuba would protect Cuba, balance US missiles placed in Turkey, strengthen Soviet power. But it was a move filled with risk. The discovery. In October 1962, US spy planes flying over Cuba captured shocking images. The Soviet Union was secretly building nuclear missile sites. These missiles could strike major American cities in minutes. President John F. Kennedy was informed. Now the question was, how should the United States respond? Immediate airstrike? Full invasion? Or something more controlled? Every option carried enormous risk. The blockade. Instead of launching an immediate attack, President Kennedy chose a naval blockade, officially called a quarantine. US warships surrounded Cuba. Soviet ships carrying military supplies were heading toward the island. If Soviet ships crossed the blockade line, confrontation would be unavoidable. The world watched anxiously. Nuclear forces on both sides were placed on high alert. The tension was real, and one mistake could trigger global war. The most dangerous moment. At the height of the crisis, several events nearly pushed the world into war. A US spy plane was shot down over Cuba. Military advisors urged immediate retaliation. At sea, Soviet submarines were surrounded by US ships. One Soviet submarine commander nearly launched a nuclear torpedo, believing war had already begun. Only the refusal of one officer prevented the launch. History could have changed in that moment. Secret negotiations. Behind the scenes, intense diplomatic communication began. President Kennedy and Khrushchev exchanged urgent letters. Eventually, a deal was reached. The Soviet Union would remove its missiles from Cuba. The United States would publicly promise not to invade Cuba. Secretly, the US agreed to remove its missiles from Turkey. The agreement de-escalated the crisis. Nuclear war was avoided. The aftermath. The Cuban Missile Crisis changed global politics forever. Both nations realized how close they had come to catastrophe. As a result, a direct communication hotline was established between Washington and Moscow. Nuclear arms control discussions began. Future confrontations were handled more cautiously. The crisis became a lesson in restraint and leadership. Conclusion. For 13 days in October 1962, humanity stood on the brink. One wrong decision, one miscalculation, one missile, and the world might not exist as we know it today. The Cuban Missile Crisis reminds us of something powerful. Nuclear weapons are not just instruments of power. They are responsibilities. And sometimes, The greatest victory in history is not winning a war, but preventing one.